Jane Seymour was Queen of England from 1536 to 1537 as the third wife of King Henry VIII. She succeeded Anne Boleyn as Queen Consort following the latter's execution for high treason, incest and adultery in May 1536. She died of postnatal complications less than 2 weeks after the birth of her only child, a son who reigned as Edward VI. She was the only one of Henry's wives to receive a queen's funeral, and his only consort to be buried beside him in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. She was the only wife of Henry VIII whose son survived infancy. Early life. Jane Seymour was likely born at Wolfhall, Savernake Forest, Wiltshire, the daughter of Sir John Seymour and Marjorie Wentworth. Through her maternal grandfather, she was a descendant of King Edward III of England through Lionel of Antwerp, 1st Duke of Clarence. Because of this, she and King Henry VIII were fifth cousins. She was a half-second cousin to her predecessor Anne Boleyn, sharing a great-grandmother, Elizabeth Cheney. She was not educated as highly as King Henry's previous wives, Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. She could read and write a little, but was much better at needlework and household management, which were considered much more necessary for women. Jane's needlework was reported to be beautiful and elaborate. Some of her works survived as late as 1652, when it is recorded to have been given to the Seymour family. After her death, it was noted that Henry was an enthusiastic embroiderer. She became a maid of honour in 1532 to Queen Catherine, but may have served her as early as 1527, and went on to serve Queen Anne. The first report of Henry VIII's interest in Jane Seymour was in early 1536, sometime before Catherine's death. Jane was noted to have a childlike face, as well as a modest personality. According to the imperial ambassador Eustace Chappies, Jane was of middling stature and very pale. He also commented that she was not of much beauty. However, John Russell stated that Jane was the fairest of all the king's wives. Polydore Virgil commented that she was a woman of the utmost charm in both character and appearance. Marriage and birth of heir. King Henry VIII was betrothed to Jane on May 20, 1536, just one day after Anne Boleyn's execution. The couple married at the Palace of Whitehall, London, in the Queen's Closet by Bishop Gardiner on May 30, 1536. As a wedding gift the king made her a grant of 104 manors in 4 counties as well as a number of forests and hunting chases for her jointure, the income to support her during their marriage. She was publicly proclaimed as Queen Consort on June 4. Unregistered trademark well-publicized sympathy for the late Queen Catherine and the Lady Mary showed her to be compassionate and made her a popular figure with the common people and most of the courtiers. She was never crowned because of plague in London, where the coronation was to take place. Henry may have been reluctant to crown Jane before she had fulfilled her duty as a queen consort by bearing him a son and a male heir. As queen, Jane Seymour was said to be strict and formal. Her motto was bound to obey and serve. She was close to her female relations, Anne Stanhope and her sister, Elizabeth. Jane was also close to the Lady Lisle along with her sister-in-law the Lady Beauchamp. Jane considered Lisle's daughters as maids of honour, and she left many of her possessions to Beauchamp. Jane would form a very close relationship with Mary Tudor. The lavish entertainments, gaiety, and extravagance of the Queen's household, which had reached its peak during the time of Anne Boleyn, was replaced by a strict enforcement of decorum. For example, she banned the French fashions that Anne Boleyn had introduced. Politically, Seymour appears to have been conservative. Her only reported involvement in national affairs, in 1536, was when she asked for pardons for participants in the Pilgrimage of Grace. Henry is said to have rejected this, reminding her of the fate her predecessor met with when she meddled in his affairs. Jane put forth much effort to restore Henry's first child, Princess Mary, to court and to the royal succession, behind any children that Jane might have with Henry. Jane brought up the issue of Mary's restoration both before and after she became queen. While Jane was unable to restore Mary to the line of succession, she was able to reconcile her with Henry. Eustace Chappies wrote to Charles V of Jane's compassion and efforts on behalf of Mary's return to favour. A letter from Mary to Jane shows that Mary was grateful to Jane. While it was Jane who first pushed for the restoration, Mary and Elizabeth were not reinstated to the succession until Henry's sixth wife, Queen Catherine Parr, convinced him to do so. In early 1537, Jane became pregnant. During her pregnancy, she developed a craving for quail, which Henry ordered for her from Calais and Flanders. During the summer, she took no public engagements and led a relatively quiet life, being attended by the royal physicians and the best midwives in the kingdom. She went into confinement in September 1537 and gave birth to the coveted male heir, the future King Edward VI, at 2 o'clock in the morning on October 12, 1537 at Hampton Court Palace. Edward was christened on October 15, 1537, without his mother in attendance, as was the custom. Both of the king's daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, were present and carried the infant's train during the ceremony. Death and funeral. Jane Seymour's labor had been difficult, lasting 2 nights and 3 days, probably because the baby was not well positioned. After the christening, it became clear that she was seriously ill. Jane Seymour died on October 24, 1537 at Hampton Court Palace at Kingston upon Thames. Within a few weeks of the death of Queen Jane there existed conflicting testimonies concerning the cause of her demise. According to King Edward's biographer, Jennifer Loach, Jane Seymour's death may have been due to an infection from a retained placenta. According to Alison Weir, death could have also been caused by puerperal fever due to a bacterial infection contracted during the birth or a tear in her perineum which became infected. Jane Seymour was buried on November 12, 1537 in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle after the funeral in which her stepdaughter, Mary, acted as chief mourner. A procession of 29 mourners followed Lady Mary, one for every year of Queen Jane unregistered trademark's life. Jane was the only one of Henry's wives to receive a queen's funeral. The following inscription was above her grave for a time. After her death, Henry wore black for the next 3 months and did not remarry for 3 years, although marriage negotiations were tentatively begun soon after her death. Moreover, he put on weight during his long widowerhood, becoming obese and swollen and developing diabetes and gout. Historians have speculated she was Henry's favorite wife because she gave birth to a male heir. When he died in 1547, Henry was buried beside her, on his request, in the grave he had made for her. Legacy. Jane gave the king the son he so desperately needed, helped to restore Lady Mary to the succession and her for their unregistered trademark's affections, and used her influence to bring about the advancement of her family. 2 of Jane's brothers, Thomas and Edward, used her memory to improve their own fortunes. Thomas was rumoured to have been pursuing the future Elizabeth I, but married the Queen Dowager Catherine Parr instead. In the reign of the young King Edward VI, Edward Seymour set himself up as Lord Protector and de facto ruler of the kingdom. Both brothers eventually fell from power, and were executed. In popular culture, in film, in 1933, Wendy Barry played Seymour opposite Charles Laughton's Henry VIII in Alexander Korda's highly acclaimed film The Private Life of Henry VIII. As part of the 1970 BBC series The 6 Wives of Henry VIII, the episode entitled Jane Seymour presented her as a shy but honest introvert, devoted to her husband. Henry was played by Keith Michael, and Seymour by Anne Stanley-Browse. The previous episode Anne Boleyn displayed Jane as fully knowing the damage her relationship with King Henry was doing. In 1972, this interpretation was repeated in the film Henry VIII and His 6 Wives, adapted from the BBC series, in which Keith Michael reprised his role as Henry. On this occasion Seymour was played by Jane Asher. Seymour was played by Charlotte Roach in David Starkey's documentary series on Henry's Queens in 2001. Seymour is a supporting character in the 2003 BBC television drama The Other Boleyn Girl, played by Naomi Benson opposite Judd Harris as Henry VIII and Jodie May as Anne Boleyn. In October 2003, in the 2-part ITV drama Henry VIII, Ray Winstone starred as the King. Jane Seymour was played by Amelia Fox. In The Simpsons 2004 episode Magical History Tour, Seymour is portrayed by the shrill Miss Springfield during Marge's retelling of Henry's reign. Henry quickly orders Seymour's beheading after hearing her annoying voice. Anita Bryant portrayed Seymour as lady-in-waiting to Anne Boleyn in the second season of the television series The Tudors, produced for Showtime. In the third season of the same series, when Jane Seymour becomes queen and later dies, the part is played by Annabelle Wallis. Seymour was played by actress Corinne Galloway in the 2008 film The Other Boleyn Girl. In books, is the main character in Carolee Erickson's novel The Favourite Queen, which follows her from her appointment as lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon right up to the time she herself becomes Henry's consort. Is the subject of the novel Plain Jane, a novel of Jane Seymour by Lorien Gardner. Appears as a lady serving both Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn in Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, which ends with hints of her coming prominence. The second novel in Mantel's series, Bring Up the Bodies, focuses on the machinations that led to the execution of Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's growing determination to replace her with Jane Seymour and the Seymour family's stratagems to gain from the king's attraction to Jane. A planned third volume, The Mirror and the Light, is expected to tell Jane Seymour's story. The book Jane, by Diane Hiager, tells of her growing up and, before catching the eye of King Henry, meeting a young man whose parents are well placed in court and look down on Jane and her family. Despite this, Jane and the son become close, and over the years she never forgets him. In music, as Giovanna Seymour, she appears in Gaetano Donizetti's opera Anna Bolena. Rick Wakeman recorded the piece Jane Seymour for his 1973 album The Six Wives of Henry VIII. The English ballad The Death of Queen Jane is about the death of Jane Seymour following the birth of Prince Edward. The story as related in the ballad is historically inaccurate, but apparently reflects the popular view at the time of the events surrounding her death. The historical fact is that Prince Edward was born naturally, and that his mother succumbed to infection and died 12 days later. Most versions of the song end with the contrast between the joy of the birth of the prince and the grief of the death of the queen. A setting of the ballad to a tune by Irish musician Dar Ithersproul was included on the Bothy Band's 1979 album After Hours and their 2008 album Best of the Bothy Band. The song also appears on Lauriana McKennett's 2010 album Barley, and on Sproul's 2011 album Lost River, Volume 1. And it was featured in the Coen brothers' 2013 film Inside Llewyn Davis. The song Lady Jane by the Rolling Stones is rumored to be about Jane Seymour and her relationship with Henry VIII. Lineage, footnotes. Sources. External links, Jane Seymour, Queen of England Family Tree, Jane Seymour. Find a Graver, a quick overview of Jane's life, with a good portrait gallery as well, a more in-depth historical look at Jane's life and times, a geobiography tour of the Six Wives of Henry VIII on Google Earth. The text of the ballad The Death of Queen Jane, photo of Seymour waxwork FLICKR, a 1996 interview with Anne Boleyn's most respected academic biographer, E.W. Ives, in which he offers his interpretations of Anne Boleyn but also speculates on the role Jane played in Anne's downfall.